Your current identity is not just deciding what you do, it's deciding what you could even imagine doing. That is why you can set new goals, feel a rush of excitement, and still end up back in the same routines as the same person, wondering, is this it? Because the problem is not the goal, the problem is the identity that the goal is coming from. So, in this video, I want to talk about what becomes possible when you start living from that new identity. Before we talk about how to change that identity, you have to understand what your identity actually does. Because your identity is not just how you feel about yourself, it is the lens that you're seeing your life. What you're actually seeing is reality through your beliefs, your stories, your self concept, your habits, and the narratives that you've probably been repeating for years. If you see yourself as someone who is behind, you will constantly scan for evidence that you are behind. If you see yourself as someone who doesn't follow through, you will keep noticing every time that you don't follow through. If you see yourself as socially awkward or not confident, your mind will keep reminding you that that is your identity. And this is why most people stay stuck even when they change their goals, because they never stop to question the lens that they're seeing life through. So you can change the plan, or you can change your routine, or come up with new goals. But if you're still looking at life through the same identity, you will not see the same possibilities or outcomes that a more confident version of you would see. Because your identity does not only shape how you feel, it shapes what you believe is available to you, what's possible. The question is, what identity am I living from? What lens am I seeing through and making these decisions? Because if you can't see that that's a filter, no matter what you put on top of it, nothing actually is going to change in your life. This is what I would call the possibility gap. The possibility gap is the space between the life you say you want and the identity that you're currently operating from. Because most people try to change their life by changing their goals. You come up with a better plan or a routine, or you tell yourself that it's time to get serious, no more. And this can help because it feels like change. But if that identity underneath does not change, these new goals are still being chosen by the old self. Do you understand this? Do you see where I'm coming from? So these new goals that you set are from this current self. They're not pulling you or changing you. You're still creating from that same lens. This is the self that got you here in the first place. And that is the version of you that's going to choose what feels safe and familiar. So the goals you set are realistic and achievable from that identity, from the current identity. But the problem with that is they don't require any type of stretching or change of behavior or new thinking patterns to get there. So even if you do reach those goals, you end up in the same place with slightly more age and maybe some temporary achievements under your belt. But underneath it, you're still the same person, seeing life in the same way. And this is what I want you to realize. Your current identity does not just affect whether you achieve your goals, it affects which goals you even consider setting. A more confident version of you might not even want the same future. A more courageous version of you would be willing to say what he wants, even if it feels scary. So, if you want to change your life, you have to ask, who is the version of me choosing this goal? And is that version actually capable of imagining the life that I say I want? Identity creates thoughts. Thoughts shape what feels possible. What feels possible becomes your goals. Your goals shape your behavior. Your behavior creates outcomes, and your outcomes reinforce your identity. That is the loop. Identity, thoughts, possibility, goals, behavior, and outcomes, and then back to identity. So if deep down you believe you're not the type of person who can build something meaningful, your thoughts will reflect that. Not only will you think smaller, but you'll hesitate more and set safer goals because nothing is really inspiring real change. As a result, outcomes usually stay relatively the same, and that becomes your evidence for your identity. The brain sees patterns and then creates a story that you live with every day. And then you convince yourself that that thing over there is not really for you. Like it's delusional to think that you can get that, or it's delusional to think that that's actually yours. Rather than convincing yourself to become the person where that goal is aligned, you convince yourself that it's delusion, but it's not delusion. It's inside of you and it's possible. You just need to get out of your own way because all of this works in the other direction too. So you remember that identity loop. If you start to genuinely see yourself as someone who is capable and bold and courageous and expressive and worthy of being taken seriously, your thoughts start to change. You start noticing different opportunities and asking different questions. That's when you start setting different goals. This is why identity change becomes so powerful because it changes how you operate within the world. This is where most people get stuck. They understand the idea and they feel inspired by it. They think, okay, so I need to become a new version of myself. But then they get right back to the same life, the same routines, the same reactions, and the same environments with the same old story. Because it's one thing to understand that your identity is a filter, but it's another thing to actually live from a different one. Reason it's hard is because your current identity has history. You've been collecting proof of this version that you are now for years. So even if you get a glimpse of who you could become, your old identity is going to pull you back toward what is familiar. It will say, that's not realistic. Why are you trying so hard? Or this is cringe. This is what discomfort is supposed to feel like. It's not just that physical pain, it's the emotional pull between who you are and who you want to be. That's a stretch. That does not feel good. But if you're not aware of that, you mistake this old identity for truth. You allow those voices to tell you not to change, to stay the same, and nothing changed. You keep going in the same loop. But you must know it is not the truth. It's just a story. It's just a pattern. It's just an operating system that you get to upgrade. You can ask, is this the identity I want creating my future? Because if you want a different life, you cannot let that version of you decide what's possible for you. A more confident and courageous version of you would not make the same decisions or speak in the same way, or procrastinate on the same ideas. He would not tolerate the same patterns because while all that might feel familiar to your current self, it would feel unaligned to the person who you want to become. And I think this is where we have to be honest. If you were actually as confident, as bold, as courageous, and as authentic as you imagine yourself being, what would change? What would you try? What would you say and who would you say it to? What would become possible that does not feel possible from your current identity? And I'm not saying to suddenly attach your worth to outcomes. I'm not saying that you need a new business or a new body or a new relationship. That's not the point. The outcome is for the evidence. What you have in your life now is what your current identity is allowing. And the version of yourself that is fully alive, fully present, and honest would naturally create different results because the way that version of you is living creates a life with different thoughts and different standards and different actions. That is the shift. So for me, when I asked myself this question, if I actually lived as this confident, bold, authentic version of myself, I started to realize that I was operating from an identity that constantly asked, who do I need to be in this moment? And once I realized that, I started to ask myself the same questions I posed. And what happened was I decided that I was more equivalent to a jester who was juggling balls in the air for approval, which made me realize that if I dropped the ball or failed, I felt like a failure. I was able to see my old identity in a new lens. I saw how much of a performer I was. And from this space, I started talking about things I really cared about. I started taking actions that aligned with who I wanted to become. A different life is built by a different version of you making different decisions, so much so that the world starts responding differently to you. This is the mistake that I think a lot of people make with identity work. You get this glimpse of the new version. You feel that energy. and you journal and you visualize. This makes you feel powerful in the moment, but then you keep taking the same old routes. There will be moments where you can align with this new version of you, but because it feels so unfamiliar, you hesitate and do the same thing. It's like someone is handing you a more powerful engine that can go faster and travel further, but you still use it to drive the same 5-minute route to the same places every day. This is what happens when you change how you feel, but you never ask what should now be possible. You feel different, but you don't choose differently. You don't set different goals or take different actions. And eventually, the old identity has no choice but to come back because the new identity was never given the life to lead. It was just a feeling. This is why the question matters. If I actually became this version of myself, what would now be possible? This question forces the identity to become practical because identity change is not just about feeling better. It is about changing the person who is actually creating the goals. So here is the question I want you to take with you. What would become possible if I showed up today as the version of me that I keep imagining? What would be possible if that version of you led? This is where identity becomes real. Being, acting, deciding, creating from that future self. Not just in the journal, not just in visualizations, but in the moments where your old identity would normally choose for you or act in a certain way, you pause for long enough to let that new one lead. This is the shift. The version of you that changes your life is not some fantasy future self. It's not an imaginary person that you're waiting to become. It is the version of you that starts making the decisions today. Each conversation, each action, each moment where you stop asking what the old version would do and you start asking what becomes possible if this version that I want to be leads the way. Because your current identity is creating your current life. This is what got you here. And if you want a different life, you don't just need different goals on top of the same identity. You need to become the person who sees a different life as possible. And then you can start acting like that life is available to you.